Welcome, everyone. This is Ship It, and I'm speaking today about traits of high-performing tech teams. I wanted to give a brief bio for those that don't know me. Maybe some of you have seen my posts online, but my name is David Markley. I've been in tech leadership for over 30 years. I started out as an engineer. I spent 12 years in startups, and at the same time I was in startups in Bellevue, in Pittsburgh, Boston, DC. I was also in the National Guard for 20 years. So it's an interesting aspect of my leadership. I have both tech and military in my background. That's a part-time role. I spent 7.5 years at Amazon, 5 years at Warner Brothers Discovery, interviewing thousands of people and looking at many thousands of resumes. So it's a little about me. And with that, we'll jump in to the course. I love this quote from Peter Drucker because it always reminds me that no matter how great a plan we have, we always need to understand what the team's morale is. If you haven't gotten your team working and trusting you, you're just going to have a very uphill battle to get things done. So no matter how good your strategy is, if you don't build a good culture, it's not going to be as effective as it could be. So today I'll be covering what high-performing teams look like, the traits that they have, how you build them, how you inherit them, and what you do with them. And then we'll switch to looking at low-performing tech teams. What does it mean to be low-performing, and why are they low-performing, and how do you move them from low-performing to high-performing? Once you've built them into that high-performing tech team, we'll discuss how you challenge your tech team. How do you get the most out of them? Because that's a large part of your job as a senior tech leader, is to get the most out of your team for the business. And that's the final piece and the most important piece. How do you make sure that your work is aligned with the business? Because if your work to develop and build a high-tech, impactful team isn't aligned with business objectives that are moving the needle, it's just not going to be effective. So high-performing tech teams, clear objectives, they know why they're doing things, they know what they need to do, they know how they need to deliver, and they know what the impacts are. They know that business outcome. They're driven, they understand everything that they need to do. They have high trust. And by this, it means they're willing to speak up when things are going wrong. They trust that their leaders are representing them. They have the psychological safety to say, hey, I think we should be doing something else, or I think this is going the wrong way. If you don't have that high level of trust, the team is truly not high performing. And another key point of a truly high performing team is that they're continuously delivering value over time. It's not just that they do it one time, like run a sprint and deliver one thing, because you can do that. You can drive a team to deliver one thing, and that's great. But are they continuously delivering value over sprints, over months, over years? Are they providing that value to stakeholders? Now, when I went to Europe, I took on the Eurosport team, which is based primarily in Paris and London. This team was already working quite well. They had a clear understanding of what they needed to do. They were driving streaming delivery, and they needed to make it perfect in 47 countries in Europe. It's an amazing task. They were executing correctly. They were working with their product stakeholders, their business stakeholders. They understood the value they were delivering. And in this case, what I needed to do, primarily as a new leader, was gain their trust and let them understand that I was working with them to get things moving. So over time, as I stood up for them and I stood beside them to get things done, I was then able to move things more into a direction that the main company wanted to head, move things, and I mean by changing process slightly so they could get things done even better. And then we took on new challenges. We took on challenges of TNT Sports, which was a joint venture between British Telecom and Warner Brothers Discovery. We took on new Olympic features, which were really challenging for the team. But because they were already performing and I had gained their trust, we were able to execute cleanly and continuously on all of those things. By contrast, when you look at a low-performing team, they're not delivering, or they're seen as not delivering. And those are perhaps two important distinctions, but if senior leadership doesn't see a team as performing, they're a low-performing team. if they don't have somebody who's advocating for them and working with them, they're not seen as delivering and providing the value that they need to for the business. You need to, in this case, diagnose what the root cause is. Why is it that the team isn't performing? Is it a people problem? Is it a process problem? I have found in many cases it's more often a people problem than a process problem. The people drive the process. It's just inherent. You may also look at whether the team has the skills. Can they do the job that they're required to do? If they can't do that job, you need to train them to do the job. And of course, if there's a low morale or low trust, you need to invest in building that morale, building that trust. Now, unlike the Eurosport team, I took on the Discovery team in London. The client team there was not seen as performing well. They weren't delivering. They had missed dates for the last year. I was brought over because they needed to deliver. They needed a re-platforming effort completed before the end of the year. And it was a bit of chaos. My predecessor had been somebody who tended to blame, who tended to yell at people if he got bad news. This just happens. Occasionally you'll get somebody that drives that way. But unfortunately, the team had heard that in a meeting with senior leadership, he had basically called them out. He'd thrown them under the bus. He'd said, this team doesn't know what they're doing. I need to redo everything. I need to rebuild the team. So this is the environment that I came into. My predecessor had basically thrown the team under the bus. He was an American who had also come to London. They didn't trust somebody coming from London. So I had my work cut out for me. It didn't take as much as you would think. I was able to come on board and get to know the right people, learn what was going on, look for things that actually were going wrong, and then change the wording. Instead of saying, this team is terrible, I went back to senior leadership. And that's very harsh, but you could just say, this team doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't have things right. I went back to senior leadership and said, I have done the analysis and we have a list of things that we need to work on. We're going to work on these over the next several weeks and months, and you'll see improvement over time. And that message, even though that was, again, part of my message here is always know that something that's said in a leadership meeting seems to get back to your team. That message got back to the team, and I'm glad it did, because it led them to understand I was working with them. Yes, I was in charge, but I owned the problem. I owned it now. And so it wasn't the team that was doing something. That's an important distinction, because I, by owning it, gained their trust that they knew I wanted to help improve things. And over time, we did. Within about 2 weeks, or 2 months, actually, we had things delivering on a regular schedule. We were starting to see incremental change. And within the 6 months that we needed to, we delivered the replatforming effort, and everybody was happy. It was a dramatic change. The team wasn't actually as bad as it had been represented. And that's something that's a failure in leadership to me, that you don't throw a team under the bus. You need to work with them. And that just improved morale. It changed them from being perceived and acting like a low performing team to becoming a high performing team. And we move forward. I will say, and an important call out is, while I was going through this analysis, it is often a people problem. And it wasn't just the manager. I ran into people who were pushing back on the changes that I needed to make on behalf of the rest of the company, and they were not being reasonable about it. And by being reasonable, I mean, I want people to come to me and tell me, we need to make, I disagree with you, David. I want this to be done a different way, or, this is why we should do it a different way. We can have that very deep conversation. We can do that in private. We can discuss their concerns, but then when we make a decision, we have to go forward. Amazon has a great leadership principle on this: have backbone, disagree, and commit. I was having a number of people who would not disagree and commit. They would have the backbone by far, but it was too far. And by too far, I mean, when you have a team that is trying to change direction and you have leaders or even individuals, senior individual contributors, who are pulling in a different direction, you need to get them aligned or moved on. And a number of them did. A number of them kind of stomped their feet and left. Great, goodbye. I was very happy to see that. Made it easy for me. It's the people who stay and continue to pull in the wrong direction that continue to drag the team down. Your team will be stronger with less people like that. You want debate. You want people to push forward on things. You kind of want that drive, but you cannot have people who are pulling against you, or you're going to constantly have a low performing team. So once you've put in all that hard effort to go from a low performing team to a high performing team, or you have that high performing team, how do you challenge the team? How do you challenge the team to make sure you're getting the most out of them? Because that is what the business wants. They want the best value for the people that they have and the skills that are available. This is where high-performing teams typically already understand this decision discipline. They already understand how to avoid paralysis analysis. They understand how to ask the right questions. And as a leader, you need to know how to ask the right questions. If there's a blockage in delivery, for example, you should be asking, what could we ship in the next week? How could we break that up? How could we start making progress? That's a specific example. I will call out that getting something shipped starts to unclog the pipeline. People start to see they can deliver. They start to believe they can deliver. So ask those questions and time box every decision. Important call out. Time box every decision. Decisions should take hours and maybe even minutes, not days and weeks. You shouldn't be going on and on in Slack channels and email threads to make a decision. Now, some decisions are larger, obviously, but on the day-to-day, I can't count the number of times I've seen a team circling because they can't make a decision. So you need to challenge them. When they're making a decision on dates, when they're making a decision on just how to build something, time box it. Make sure they know that. For deadline management, teams need to understand that both bottoms up and top down schedules are valid. Bottoms up are kind of the realistic schedules. They're the ones that come from engineering. They're the ones that people like to think are the best. And, some people will even say there should only be bottoms up, but it's not realistic. Top down are strategic. There are things like business needs. There are also things in my world like sports dates. I couldn't move the Olympics. The opening ceremony's always going to be when the opening ceremony is. I can't change it. The only time it ever changed was for COVID, and we don't want that again. So both are valid. So how do you make sure that the team understands how much they can deliver in the amount of time available? Whether it's top down, where it's a fixed date, you can add more features until you start to hear noise. If it's bottom up and the date's way out there, you can bring the date in and see how many people are complaining about it. This is where I call it squeaky wheels. You're listening for the squeaky wheels on the train. You're trying to get things launched. How many squeaky wheels do you hear? If you hear one or two people, one or two engineers in your team complaining that it's too much, we can't get it done, you tend to discount that. You tend to say, well, okay, there may be a few people who are either allergic to work or just don't like to have extra work coming down. If half the team, however, is saying, I don't think we can do that, I don't think we can get that done, you've got a problem in your schedule and you've just set yourself up for failure. Now, those are both extremes, and you start to understand where the point is. It's kind of a bell curve if you think about it. There's going to be a few at the very, very end of the bell curve that are complaining, but when it gets to the middle, you've gone too far. But over time, you'll start to know there are a few people who are your key squeaky wheels, the people you know and trust that have a good sense for when things are going to deliver and whether the team is overstressed. It's a great mechanism. If there's one takeaway today, this is a great one, to learn about how to listen for squeaky wheels. It's so important to gain this skill as a senior leader to understand when the team is being pushed to the point where you're crushing them or when you're pushing them to the point where they're actually delivering at an optimum point. And this is a great way to look at it. So when we were doing the Olympics, for example, we had a long lead time. The Olympics were a year out. We scheduled everything so that we had about 2 months of slack at the end. That seems like a lot, but given the fact that although failure is an option by many accounts today, it wasn't an option for the Olympics. It's just not. Not really. So you have 2 months of slack, but we had everything planned out. We were working along wonderfully, executing, getting everything shipped incrementally over time. But of course, in the last quarter, people come up with ideas and new features that they're going to add to it. This is kind of why we had that 2 month lead time. We knew there were going to be things, and some of them are important. Some of them will move the needle for the business. Some of them won't. And you have to decide which ones will and won't and push back, have a strong backbone. I will say, as a senior leader, this is a great time to practice no. And I did. I practiced no, said no to many of the new ideas and features because we didn't have the time. It would disrupt the schedule. I would also say, if you want that, this is what it will take, which is a form of no, but it lets people know I'm willing to work with them, but we can't just throw everything in at the last minute. And that is a form of aligning business with tech. I know the business had goals. I know that they wanted to deliver. They had a key aspect of what we were delivering for the Olympic was an increase in streaming. So we had everything we were building was focused on how do we increase the number of streaming customers that we brought into Max. And Max is the HBO Max replacement in Europe. They were launching just before the Olympics. But we were working on a lot of different features, and we had to make sure we weren't working on features that were just cool for technology or cool for the product team. It was something that had a business goal, a business impact. It's not the tech that makes the business run, but it is the tech that can make the business successful. So if the tech is not working well with the business, you're going to be misaligned. You're going to have resources that are not working on things that have an impact, and business will not appreciate that in the end. So one of the key things to do here is always align every technical effort, every project that you have must map to a business or customer need and understand what that impact is. This is not a one-time thing, by the way. This is continuous. This is for those in sprints. This is sprint demos back to the product team. This is understanding what you're doing and how it impacts. This goes all the way back to the team understanding why they're doing something. If they don't understand why they're doing it and what the impact is on the business, then what value does it have? They're not going to be motivated. They're not going to understand exactly what they need to do. This is kind of the key piece in the end. If you don't align the tech initiatives with the business impacts, then you're failing in your leadership role. And it's going to be a challenge for you to push for new projects and new initiatives if you can't communicate that back to the business. So just before we go into Q&A, I want to add that we've covered kind of the DNA of high-performing teams, how to diagnose teams, and kind of the technology challenges. But the key thing I would say is making sure all of that aligns with the business, as we said on the last slide. And so with that, I'd like you to pick one of the practices this week and work on it, figure out what you could do with the knowledge in this next week. Jason, do we want to go into questions?
Yep, let's do questions. 3 options: raise hand, type in the chat, or use the Zoom Q&A. So whatever works for you. Jaspreet, go for it.
Hi, David. So my question is, I know that teams are under the gun always for delivering on time. So how do you avoid, burn down in that case? Because I know that every deadline is important, but let's say the team is burned down by, with the constant pressure to deliver on time. So as a leader, how do we avoid that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if my kind of point on the squeaky wheel, if people are being burned down, it probably means you are running them too fast. That's another indicator. It's kind of that level of squeaky wheels. If it's 1 or 2 people who seem to be burned down or stressed out, again, I'd kind of go to the squeaky wheel. Like, you need to figure out, how is your pace of delivery too fast? Is it 1 or 2 people that are complaining, or is it the whole team that seems very burned out? And if the whole team is, or if half the team is, then you're definitely going too fast. If it's 1 or 2 people, then you need to figure out whether their workload individually they're being overloaded somehow. At least that's my take on it. When I see a team that is constantly burned down, typically it's because leadership is asking too much. They really have cut too many resources, or they're putting too much on the plate and nobody's saying no. Like, I don't know who on your team says no, but that's one of the things you have to do for the team is say no.
Yeah, thanks.
David, to
Thank you.
build on
Yep.
that one,
Yes.
if there are many squeaky wheels on your team and they're all speaking loudly, but this directive's coming down from the top SVP or CTO level, and they're like, look, just get it done. How as a leader, how would you handle that upwards?
Upward, look, I've been in that situation. Upward, I would be very clear of what the impacts are going to be. Like, we can do it. We can push. I can push the team to do that. But to the earlier question, that's going to burn the team out very quickly. So if you want to go that fast, the result is that you may have 20% of the people leave within the next year, 40% leave. I've seen teams that had that kind of turnover. So I know that sometimes business has to do that. I've been in both startups and large companies where they felt that something was so urgent that they were willing to push. And I also believe there are times that you need to do that with the team. And I will communicate to the team, like, this is absolutely urgent. We need to push, drive as hard as we can to get this out the door. That's a little different than the sustained delivery over time, Jason. I agree. It's a great question. Like, there are times where you need to run fast, and people will accept it for a short period of time. But if you're always running fast, as the previous person asked, you're going to burn the team out, and you're going to have large turnover. It's not going to be as productive.
That makes sense. Let's see if there's any other questions. In the meantime, David, while we wait, if there's
Sure.
another question, do you want to go to the next slide about the course?
Oh, yes. Oh, my buttons are out of order. There we go. So you want to speak to this, or I mean, we have the course coming up on June 7th and 8th. Part of this will be part of that course, but it talks about overall how to avoid failures and lead to tech projects and success. And we have the early bird discount code here, which you can use to sign up for the course today.
Yep. So this discount will end, enroll by May 4th. And
By
it
May
will
4th.
be the largest discount offered for this course. And I'll say, so this would be the second cohort that we're running that David and Ethan are teaching. And this second cohort will include new content and modules regarding AI. So we'll speak more about that in the future. Let me see. Any other questions? If not, we can end this lightning lesson early. I'm just seeing comments. Thank you for the insightful session. There is one thing I wanted to point out about the course, because we often get this question. I'm pulling it up right now.
Sure.
Is this is not a tech class.
No.
It's about leading large tech to shipment. So in the previous cohort, yes, we did get many engineering leaders as students, but it's also relevant to product managers, program managers, business leaders, data science, and anyone else who needs to get a tech project out the door on time and on budget. So don't think this is just for tech people.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point, Jason. And it really isn't. It's, if you want to understand how tech operates and you want to help get things out the door, I think anybody, even senior leaders, would be useful to understand how things are working and asking the right questions. You'll walk away understanding better how to launch things and to make sure your team is doing the right things.
Yep. Oh, David, we do have a question from Mary in the chat, so I'll
Sure.
repeat it. Is there a point where transitioning from small team to mid-size to large teams where the scale escalation differs?
Okay, let me read that back. So where the scale matters in terms of, I guess I can't see the questions here, Jason, but maybe you can, Mary, if you want to type it out.
Yeah,
I'm going to assume you're talking about, like, from a leadership point of view in terms of the tech team and driving.
Yeah, I guess, how does scale escalation differ from small teams to big teams, or as your teams grow?
I mean, when you're, for example, a line manager, all of this still applies, even though you're not typically operating at that strategic level. You still have all of the pieces of standing up for your team, being on their side, not calling them out. But you can try to drive that smaller team. Say it's 7 to 10 people on the team, making them the most effective. But you're not necessarily going to have the strategic conversations. But you need to understand. I would say that's the biggest difference to me is the scale of operation that you're working at and how much you can have. You can always impact your team's culture. Impacting the broader culture is challenging, although I encourage everybody to take on that challenge, because if you've made a great culture in your team, I've seen this work where it becomes an example across other teams in the organization, and you can build on that. But you can have that impact, and you can also, as for example, a line manager, drive the why we're doing things from the very strategic corporate level all the way down to the team. And it's a difference of what you're actually driving and what you're focusing on. Clarifying that is great practice for as you move up from a line manager to a senior manager to a director, you're taking on a larger and larger portion of that why and that impact of the overall culture. Anything to add, Jason? Or
Mary's typing.
okay. Thank you, Mary.
Mary says you got it right, and that I didn't want to exclude mid-sized teams because for me, sometimes that's the most difficult in terms of scale. So thank you.
It can be.
Yep.
Thank you, Mary. It absolutely can be. The mid-size, but I think that's a large part of it. It's taking your piece, impacting your culture, and bringing down your piece of the why from the overall corporate piece. But I do believe that these things scale. The biggest difference, of course, once you go to being a leader of leaders, is doing that impact through your leaders, getting them to be on board with acting in this way and driving the culture that you want.
Great. I know we only have 2 minutes left, but I'll do a last call. Any other questions that people want to ask live or put in the chat? I'm scanning. Okay, it looks like we're good. I just want to share one more thing. In the chat I posted, David's guest newsletter posts in the Level Up newsletter on how to meet the biggest deadlines of your careers and the lessons from it. A lot of tech leaders have told us that they bookmarked this post as basically a guidebook or blueprint on the, I think what was it, 6 steps that David used. So a good resource for everyone here. All right, David, any last words before we end the Maven Lightning
No,
lesson?
thank you all for joining. I look forward to seeing as many of you as can join the June class. I'm excited to provide this for the community. So thank you all for being here today.